So today we're talking all about physical activity for adults and children with cerebral palsy and other childhood-onset disabilities. My name is Prue Morgan and I'm joined today by my colleagues Carlee Holmes and Rachel Kennedy.
Hi Prue. Hi
Welcome
Carlee.
guys.
Thank you.
So we know that there are guidelines for physical activity for people with conditions such as cerebral palsy, and they are quite similar to that of the general population, but we do know that the barriers for participation are greater, and we do know that most people with significant disabilities do not meet those guidelines. However, there is a number of studies out there that have, talked about different approaches to engaging people with significant disabilities in increasing physical activity, particularly children with conditions such as cerebral palsy. So today we're going to talk about, what might be some of those barriers, what might be some ways that we as physiotherapists can address those or engage people across the lifespan with becoming more physically active. So perhaps let's start off, and I'll throw to you, Rachel, by unpacking what are some of those barriers, or why are people with significant disabilities not engaging in physical activity?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a real lack of support and understanding and knowledge, and this is both for young people with a with a disability as well as the people around them. And there's a real societal attitude that they might be in a wheelchair, or they're walking with a stick, or they've got a funny looking movement, and that they can't participate in physical activity. But that's not true. We know that. But I think there's a huge societal attitude that just because they've got a disability, therefore they don't have the ability to be physically active. And I think cost of those supports to support a young person with a disability accessing appropriate physical activities is quite significant. They don't just need a parent to drive them to basketball so that they can get out of the car and play basketball. They need a support person that's there. They need a maxi taxi that's there, to transport them, for instance. So just even the actual cost of accessing physical activity is quite a barrier for them, as well as the physical access of the environment.
Yeah.
It's not set up for people with disability. A lot of different physical activities are not set up.
Yeah.
The number of gyms I've been to where there's a stairs to access a key area of the gym. It's like, hello.
Yep, absolutely. Carlee, any other barriers that you can think of?
My work focuses on people with complex disabilities, and they may not be able to move their own bodies at all in any manner. So the limited choice of what's available to them, gymnasiums don't have exercise equipment that they can access. So the choice of what they can do is a barrier, and there are things that they can do, but we need to think laterally as therapists and provide opportunities for them.
So can you expand on that a little bit more? How can those barriers be overcome?
Firstly, finding out what people can do, because everyone can do something.
Yeah.
And for example, I use motorised cycling a lot with the people that I work with, and they can't move their limbs, and so the motorised cycling machine moves them for them. They remain in their wheelchairs and they're physically active, and that's fantastic for them. And I have worked with people for many years and never seen them smile or laugh until I put them on the motorised cycle, and the joy of movement that we all know and that everyone can experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big barrier.
Yep. So we've talked about some of the societal barriers, environmental barriers, barriers around, access to appropriate equipment or facilities that enable people with profound disabilities in particular be more physically active. What about the cost? Because obviously in the current environment, that is also a barrier.
Yeah, Yeah, and, things like we have the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme here in Australia, which we're very lucky to have, but they don't cover the costs of a lot of activities. They'll cover the supports that are in place, so they'll cover the cost of a support worker, they'll cover the cost of the taxi to get them, say, to the gym, for example, but they won't cover the cost of gym access. So young people with disability who are already socially disadvantaged, economically often disadvantaged, are then having to fork out for the cost of that activity, which in the example I'm giving is going to a community gym. We know young people with disability from the work we've done that, they're willing to pay about $10 or $15 to access the gym, for example. But gyms are paying upwards of a cost upwards of $20 to access the gym. So, it's above the budget that they've got and that they're able to pay. Young people value, they want to pay for access, but they can't afford it at the level that it is. And systems such as the NDIS and other government policies aren't there to support young people with disability to access those things. Yeah.
And we all know that in the long run, being more physically active enables better physical and mental health across the lifespan.
Correct.
So putting in place or investing in supports to enable that physical activity earlier in life, particularly we're talking mainly about sort of adolescents or young adults when they're exploring or trying to identify new activities that they might be interested in, it pays off in the long run because hopefully it prevents the development of some of those adverse physical and mental health disorders that this population are so vulnerable to.
Correct. We know that there's cost savings to the health system if people are more physically active, and that goes for people with disability as much as it does as able-bodied people. So, if people with disability, and if we start young in childhood, adolescence into young adulthood, that will have a direct impact into adulthood and their lifespan and on their general health and well-being, and there will be a cost saving. It's like the keynote with the talking this morning about, physios are, we should be at preventative healthcare. That's where we are, and that needs to be recognised, and that really resonated with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Carlee, imagine that you've got a new client who's just been referred to you, a young person who's got quite profound disability, who's interested in being physically active. What would be the first thing that you might do to try and enable that?
I would ask them what they would like to do, and as a first start. And if they're very cognitively challenged as well, you speak with their carers and their family and find out, the family's interests as well, and what they might like to do and be able to facilitate, or the support workers. Yeah, and that's a very good start.
Excellent. And I'm reminded of a client that I've worked with in the past she was a young woman with profound disability in a wheelchair. She wanted to be more physically active. She went to her physio and her physio kept saying, go and play bocce. And she said, I don't like bocce.
Well, that doesn't matter. Go and play bocce.
So you're absolutely right. Yeah. Just like you would with, an able-bodied young person who came for advice, you'd ask them what are their interests? What do they want to explore? And physical activity, doesn't need to just be, going to a gym.
No, not everybody feels happy and comfortable in a gym, or again those with complex disabilities. It is such an effort to get to a gymnasium, to support workers, timing of the support workers, timing of their medications, timing of their feeds and their personal care. It's not always the best place for everybody.
Yep. So what sort of, physical activities are you aware of that young people with complex disabilities have been able to participate in?
Yeah, so even things like I also work in neuromuscular diseases, and young men with Duchenne muscular dystrophy who are in wheelchairs, unable to stand and walk, they're actually they're getting into wheelchair rugby and wheelchair hockey, and they've got this wonderful social support where they all gather together down at Parkville in Melbourne, where I'm from, and they come together on a Sunday and they've got competitions going. And I was talking to one of the young men who used to be in our clinic, bumped into him socially, and he was telling me about it. He goes, I'm not very good, but they want me to come and join in. And he had a sense of purpose, and that was wonderful. He's not able to move his body a lot, but he can move it a little bit, which was absolutely wonderful. And then I'm aware of some colleagues in Denmark who were using the passive active cycle that Carlee was talking about, again in people with really severe muscular dystrophy, very weak, and they found some wonderful outcomes for that group of people. Things like improved lower back pain, improved bowel motions, improved quality of life. It was amazing. It was fantastic that physical activity. It's not just about the movement and whatnot, it's the impact on that person's life as a result.
These are all benefits that the non-disabled population gain from being physically active and movement, and we need to provide that opportunity to people with disabilities at all levels, whether they can move a little bit or a lot. They need the choice and opportunity to engage and experience those benefits.
For sure. So there are certainly some misconceptions about risk that are held by the person with the disability themselves, their families, often by physiotherapists and other health professionals who say, oh no, it's way too dangerous for you to do physical activity. Carlee, would you like to speak to that?
Well, yes. I mean, we all should have the opportunity to take some risk in life as well. Disabled people need to take risk, but physical activity isn't risk-taking. It can be safe. It needs appropriate safeguards or outcomes.
Appropriate boundaries also around it.
Supervision if necessary, and it's safe. It can be safe.
We've had the same in neuromuscular diseases as well, in that those childhood-onset diseases where the child starts walking and then gradually becomes more disabled over time and is in a wheelchair by adulthood. And there's this fear, and there's fear amongst my colleagues and physiotherapists that if we exercise them or if they move, that we're going to damage their muscles more. And in fact, the research has found that is not the case. There is a level of fatigue and fatigue management that we need to be really aware of. But this is where it comes down to education. And part of what we're doing right now today is trying to educate our colleagues and the people and the supports around the person with disability about what is safe to do, that you shouldn't be afraid to move, that it's good to move. We just need those boundaries around, okay, well, we're not going to be overloading those muscles, but it's okay to be working sub-maximally, and that's okay. And it's better to do some movement than no movement. There's evidence in the literature around Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it's called the No Use is Disuse study, because actually they found that the young boys with Duchenne who did no movement were doing much worse than those that did some movement. And so there's this whole thing of any movement is good movement, that it's important to move.
In my group of young adults with severe and complex disability, they found that their pain decreased, their fatigue decreased, their bowel function improved, and their mood improved.
Those endorphins work.
Endorphins work, and it's safe.
It is. And also being, as you said, it's about education, not only for our colleagues, but also for the young person with the disability and maybe their family as well.
Correct.
To help them understand that a little bit of pain after using your muscle is normal.
Yes.
It should, resolve quickly, but we all get a little bit of muscle pain if we're using muscles that we haven't perhaps used
for a while.
And it's different pain to ongoing, everyday
Injury
chronic
pain.
injury pain.
Correct.
Yes. And that's the sort of pain that improved.
Yep, absolutely.
And, knowing the difference.
Yeah.
And movement is one of the first things we do, or is prescribed for most people when they have some sort of pain. Move.
Yep, exactly, yeah. I talk to the young kids with neuromuscular disorders about DOMS. I talk to them, I tell them that I get DOMS when I go to the gym as well. And, I give them parameters now. And I've got a little spiel that I now send out to all the therapists about, we've got to teach the kids it's okay to feel a little bit of muscle pain. That's not dangerous. And the parameters around what is too much, and that feeling a little bit of muscle pain means that we've moved our muscles, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So we're talking about, some of those safety sort of boundaries that can be put in place about, things like appropriate supervision or assistance if that's needed, equipment modification if that's required, educating the person about intensity and how much is too much. But also around things like if they need to manage, medication or seizures, or I'm thinking about if they're going in a swimming pool and, respiratory support. All of those things can be managed rather than us just saying as physios, no, it's way too risky, and perpetuating that anxiety around physical activity, and which ends up sort of having those adverse consequences of being, very, promoting that really sedentary lifestyle.
Correct, yeah.
Some of you have alluded to some research that is already out there. Where is the research going in relating to physical activity and people with sort of childhood-onset disabilities?
A lot of it is around education and empowering young people and actually asking, so co-design, working with people with lived experience about what they want to do, what they can do, how it's going to work for them. So there's quite a bit of work around that. We've been doing some work on social supports and that's that education sort of framework around, what are the things that need to be in place to support that young person to be physically active or to exercise in the way that they want to do. And they're things like, as Carlee mentioned before, supervision, peer support, having a friend or someone that's around your age to go and exercise or be physically active with you, having the specialists there to provide that overarching guidance around what is possible and what those boundaries are. That specialist doesn't need to be there all the time. They can provide the education to the support person or peer mentor around them. Being orientated to the activity and so that you feel comfortable in the environment. Some environments that we would typically exercise in or go to, for example, the gym, I keep coming back to the gym, can be quite overwhelming for some young people, even if you think about young people with autism as well, autistic young people. So, what's the environment like and encourage showing that person around that environment and that wayfaring around that environment so that they feel familiar. And then there's the logistics, the motivation, having someone there to coach, to not coach you, but to be motivating you and whatnot. So those social supports are really important, and that's sort of some of the work we've been doing.
Yeah. Thanks. Carlee?
Well, we have our colleague Ian Dusha, who's doing some fabulous work now with swimming in people with complex disabilities at GMFCF levels 4 and 5, which is fabulous to get that group of people out and being active. Stacey Cleary and Georgia Mackenzie have created CP Pathfinding Fitness for Life, which is a co-designed app that with young people with cerebral palsy and childhood onset disabilities, explaining the activities that they enjoy doing, how they can do it, and to get the information out to other people with disabilities and their clinicians, what's possible. I myself, my research focuses on the motorised cycling for the very complex people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And there's frame running,
Yeah.
and there's work CP Move Time, which is an app that's being researched to look at how much movement people do, and then to encourage increased movement.
Yeah. So both of you have touched on the importance of education, whether it's to the young person with the disability themselves, to their parents, or to health professionals. And certainly we've also recently, with co-design principles, developed an online module under the CP Pathfinding banner, where it's about your health and providing information for young people, in this case with cerebral palsy, about, health issues, with the idea being that, developing that health literacy across the lifespan is so important to allow a person to become empowered so that they can then make good decisions about what they want to do with their life and how they can make the most of both their physical health and their mental health. So there's certainly quite a lot of activity going on in this space. Some are specific, evaluating specific interventions, the use of certain equipment, but also around that sort of health promotion. As you said earlier, Rachel, the importance of us focusing on preventive interventions and how we can build health literacy in this population. So what might be a take-home message?
My big message for everyone is any movement is good movement. And, I came to that after I was very fortunate to do a Churchill Fellowship to look at physical activity for young people with neuromuscular diseases. And every expert I spoke to when I visited them overseas, every international expert just came back to just encourage them to move. Okay. And so any movement is good movement became my little catch cry, and that's what I say to the kids when they come into clinic. Yeah. So some get big gold elephant stamps when they're being active. Yeah,
thanks. Carlee, what would be your key take-home message?
I think my key take-home message is to involve people with complex disabilities in physical activity, and that is possible and is achievable, and that they can gain all the benefits that we all gain from physical activity, but we just need to think a little bit more laterally and out of the box about how we can encourage them to be active.
Yeah. My most important message would be, young people with disabilities, everyone's entitled be able to take the dignity of risk.
Yes.
So, we can't just, as physios, say, no, that's too dangerous, rather than saying, no, we should be saying, how can we make that happen for you?
Correct.
And how can we enable you to be able to participate in that physical activity? So sort of the concept of dignity of risk is, I think, a really important human right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree.